Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, July 24th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about Ron DeSantis' Reboot campaign. Just 2 months after announcing, the Ron DeSantis campaign announced internally and in many ways externally that they will be undergoing this reboot of a campaign to completely revitalize Ron DeSantis' image and candidacy as someone going into the upcoming presidential primaries. Now, Ron DeSantis, when he announced 2 months ago on Twitter, came in a complete ball of fire. His campaign announcement was riddled with tech issues and ultimately came up short of what was many people's expectations of being this huge prominent launch for the one person who in many people's eyes was seen as the one candidate who could take down Donald Trump. And yet 2 months out, he not only is performing worse than where he was before, but no signs are indicating that he is on track for recovery. It isn't just a post-announcement dip, it is a continuous dip, a steep climb downwards that is just a downward spiral trend that Ron DeSantis can't seem to get out of. So what happens here is that the campaign does a lot of internal reflecting and realizes they need a complete relaunch. They need to rebrand Ron DeSantis 6 months out until the Iowa caucus in order to adequately prepare him for future primaries and win primaries in the future. I mean, where we are right now currently is Ron DeSantis being in a distant second place. It's not the point that Ron DeSantis was hoping he would be in. Many people on the Republican side were expecting that once he announced, his numbers would get better. And typically, I mean, you will never see this in American politics, and which is why I say typically, almost never do you have a candidate announce their candidacy and start to perform worse nationally. I mean, this is something that is really far lost on us as to how this has happened. But when you look deeper into it and you start to see exactly how Ron DeSantis has formed himself as a candidate prior to this supposed reboot, you start to see exactly why it happened. What we're going to look at here very briefly are just the national polling numbers, because today marks an 18% mark for Ron DeSantis, the lowest point he has ever been before he announced, and dating all the way back to prior to his early announcements, all the way back to July of 2022. Over a year ago, Ron DeSantis was at a lower point than right now. In fact, it was slightly lower because you can see that on July 2nd, he was at 17.5%. So you're talking about Ron DeSantis in a year difference not being at a better position. In fact, for the past year, he's been at an even better position. The same can't be said about President Donald Trump or practically any other candidate on this list. The majority of them have done slightly better than where they were previously or are hovering around the same. Now, Ron DeSantis is hovering around the same, but keep in mind a year ago, he wasn't a candidate in the race. He has fully lost support since when he announced his candidacy versus where he is right now. And that is a problem. Now, a bunch of articles have been unpacking this reboot, saying there's no reason to believe that it's going to work, and this is the general consensus that I believe is the truth of it all. Ron DeSantis as a candidate has already branded himself in such a way that has made him so unpopular nationwide that I do not see a way that a reboot could completely change his dynamic. Now, there are ways in this reboot that I think could be beneficial, as noted in this MSNBC article, in the New York Times article, and we will get into that when we do. But for the majority of it, roughly 90% of this plan for a reboot, or what has already been discussed and is understood about Ron DeSantis, isn't going to be shaken by some last-minute pivot ahead of the upcoming primaries. Voters know what they know now, and it is really hard to shake a first impression amongst the American public, and in most cases, it's really hard to win them back, right? We've rarely ever seen the American public go ahead and turn back in a favorable position on a candidate unless they are president of the United States. For instance, Joe Biden was able to do it. Donald Trump was able to do it. Barack Obama was able to do it. I mean, at that period of time, sure, because you are so much in the minds of the American public, if there starts to become more and more positive coverage and there starts to become more and more resonating points amongst your administration, amongst the work that you're doing, that's when that happens. But as a candidate, you really have already displayed yourself to the public, and now it's a question about winning them over ahead of the upcoming primaries, but they generally know what they already do. And I think it is very difficult to see how Ron DeSantis gets out of this rut. So we're going to explore this reboot and talk about why I agree with this MSNBC opinion article that there's no reason to believe that it's actually going to work. Because truly speaking, I don't think there is a way that we can see this actually coming into fruition for Ron DeSantis and propping him back up to a better point. Now, this article here really does a good job at boiling down to some of the very early warning signs. I think just the fact that we are 2 months in the race for Ron DeSantis and he already needs a reboot is a huge warning sign on that front. It's a huge red flag that says this guy doesn't know how to win a presidential race. And It's a problem because Ron DeSantis came into this with so much expectations. He was widely expected by the betting odds for months at a time to dethrone Donald Trump. He was widely expected by the pundits to come within a few points of him should the election have been held then or the day before. Thinking about where we were in February of 2023 is a lot different than where we are right now. And this is a problem that 2 months into the election, Ron DeSantis needs this reboot. It's something that I think is just a complete and total display of unconfidence in the way that he runs this race and how he has been running this race. That's point number one. But looking at the reboot again, we said we would talk about it. The reboot here are just a few points that are quite major, I should say. More engagement with the mainstream media, more focus on national opposed to Florida-focused politics, and more small events instead of major campaign speeches. Now, 2 of these things I think are good. One of them I think is bad. But on the general front, I don't think this is going to change much because the reboot inherently isn't going to change the image. More engagement with the mainstream media, they are the ones who are putting out the stuff that you are saying on Fox News or your surrogates are saying on One American News Network or Mike Lindell TV. I mean, you have networks out here that are covered by the mainstream media. But I think they're in reference to the CNN interview that he did, which in some ways, which is a bit different for a mainstream Republican to engage with such a media organization that doesn't have the best reputation amongst candidates like Donald Trump, candidates like Ron DeSantis, and his engagement with that is a shift in a different direction. But I don't think anybody is being swayed by the fact that he's engaging with the mainstream media, nor do I think they would be swayed by the stuff that they would put out. Another thing here is that he's focusing more on small events instead of major campaign speeches. I don't think that is a good thing at all. I think Ron DeSantis needs to do both. I think he needs to be able to have a balance, but I think major campaign speeches are one of the main ways that you really see candidates like Donald Trump, candidates like Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden rally in crowds and make these major headlines out of their story, right? Make major headlines out of what they're saying on this stage. Ron DeSantis sure can connect with more local voters, but I don't think it's going to come across in a way that is actually as genuine as necessary. And keep in mind, these states that he's going to, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, can only be localized to such a point. These are states where, sure, the population is smaller than the majority of states, but when you move beyond that, you're heading into states like your own of Florida or New York or California, which will have an early primary, where you're going to have to do way more than just these small events. And I think trying to focus on these early races and completely forgetting the reality that major campaign speeches do a lot for media coverage. You're going to knock 2 birds with 1 stone. Now you're really not. You're going to have a press pooler at a small event. You're going to have a lot of cameras and a TV setup for a mainstream major event. That's the difference with these events, and I don't think it's going to serve him as much of a benefit as he thinks, but I think they're really just trying to shake things up. They've tried major speeches. Now they're going to try small events. Again, not much of a difference there. I think we will see a result in polling. And then the last thing here, the thing that I would really applaud for the DeSantis campaign is a more focus on a national as opposed to a Florida-focused campaign. I just don't know how he's going to do it, as many of his, hirees, as many of his campaign managers, staffers all hail from the state of Florida. They all were with him in the administration. It's going to be really hard to shake this idea that Ron DeSantis isn't Florida's governor. And it's not that he's trying to mislead the public, but more so that he's trying to focus on what he would do for America rather than what he has done in Florida. But I don't know how much that's going to change, but I think if anything, that is the one major plus. I do think it's good to engage more with the mainstream media. I just don't think it provides an electoral benefit that's going to be noticeable. I think it's a step in the right direction, but you need a lot more steps. You've fallen back down. You've gone from that close second place position to 30 points behind. Very obviously, he's fallen down a few more steps. So that's something to think about. So looking at the DeSantis campaign right now, I don't know if this is going to be as much of a change as we otherwise might think. So the MSNBC article really captures my viewpoint, but we're going to discuss a little bit more with this New York Times one, which is quite interesting. It gives you a little bit more of a glimpse as to where this thinking came from. And again, I will provide further commentary as to why I don't think that this is going to be actually as strong of a change as we might think. So as advisors for Ron DeSantis, whether that be members of, major donor firms, whatever it might be, are saying that Ron DeSantis needs to remake it into a leaner, meaner operation, change it from this insurgent run. And I think what we have seen from the DeSantis campaign is that instead of pandering to the center, he has shifted far to the right. We know this because Ron DeSantis has put out campaign videos like the one that is directly mentioned in the New York Times article, calling it a bizarre video on Twitter that attacked Mr. Trump as too friendly to LGBTQ people. Too friendly as a term to describe Donald Trump towards LGBTQ plus citizens is not a term that you would ever hear from a Democrat and probably not an independent. Too friendly is insane to think about in context of what has been said by the Democratic Party. So for a Republican to come out and say that Donald Trump has been too friendly, you would assume, putting aside candidates, you would assume that that would be someone from the even more extreme version of the right, the alt-right, as some would put it. And that coming from the mainstream candidate like Ron DeSantis, who supposedly is this all-encompassing, super strong, moderate-toned candidate, is, in fact, bizarre. It is crazy to think that that is how Ron DeSantis wants to go down this pathway. It's insurgent. It's dramatic. It's, in many people's eyes, insane to do as someone who is coming from the center, trying to argue that my Florida electability is national electability, which would be an argument with anybody else, but it isn't with Ron DeSantis. And we find out here that it was actually produced internally, then passed to someone via Twitter DMs, or however they wanted to do it, Dropbox, Google Drive, who cares? They posted it, they retweeted it on the DeSantis War Room, completely pulled back and said, this wasn't us, we just retweeted it, and then, you had other DeSantis staffers saying, you're soft, this is a campaign, da-da-da-da, whatever it might be. They were making an argument that they should be allowed to say that. The others were saying this still wasn't us, even if we are allowed to say it, and we soon find out not only was it them, but, this was a lie. The initial story was a lie. They didn't want to take credit for it. And if you are so comfortable being able to say what you should say, you should take credit for the videos that you do. So that's, I think, just a testament, 1 out of 1,000 cases that explains how this campaign is insurgent, how this campaign is, in many people's eyes, extreme. Extremist is the term that has been used by Democrats, and it's not something that is going to be shaken easily. And they keep blaming the media, too. Saying the media and the D.C. elites have already picked their candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I can guarantee you, if you're not Donald Trump, you're not winning that outsider rhetoric, right? Ron DeSantis is a D.C. elite. He was a congressman, then became governor. He's not some outsider. He's not some candidate who's coming into the fray because he believes that it's his American duty to run for president of the United States. He's an entrenched swamp politician that has been here for a decade and is still continuing this candidacy now nationwide and is expecting to come across the way that Donald Trump did. Like him or not, Donald Trump was a political outsider. Everything considered, he absolutely was, especially juxtaposed to Hillary Clinton, who was in politics for decades, Joe Biden, who was in the Senate for decades. I mean, those are the people that are up for comparison. And Ron DeSantis, quite frankly, has been in politics for longer than President Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump was president of the United States. It's crazy to think about that this is the argument that they are taking. But again, why I do not believe this reboot strategy is going to change at all, because it has already been embedded and imbued within the blood of their campaign that this is the strategy they are running. They are Donald Trump Jr., and it is really hard to try to shake that away now, especially given that that is his entire brand. It is not just a slight variation of the campaign. A few ads went out that might have depicted him in this sense. That is literally who he is, the way he talks, the way he carries himself, the way they have run the campaign. It is all a mimic, a poorer one, a knockoff of a Donald Trump campaign that now they want to reboot because they're realizing that the base that they were trying to tap into, Haley, Pence, Ramaswamy voters, or not even Ramaswamy, Haley, Pence, Christie voters, right? They aren't rallying behind DeSantis because some of them see him as Donald Trump 2.0 and some of them don't believe he's actually that more electable candidate. And we also find here that money is a problem too, right? Rebooting can only do so much. When you don't have a lot of money, which quite frankly he does not, you aren't going to be able to revitalize everything that you are doing. There also seems to be an issue with the super PAC here, that there's a split within the Ron DeSantis campaign. Never Back Down, which is the super PAC that supports Ron DeSantis and his bid for the presidency. In his own words, he doesn't control it. They are refusing to change course in a way that is in a favorable one for Ron DeSantis. For instance, they pulled out of the New Hampshire market because they saw that the polling numbers were collapsing for Ron DeSantis, saw a number of polls showing him in second, third place, not second, third place, third, fourth place, depending on the poll. And that was a problem. It's a huge one because Ron DeSantis thought New Hampshire was this one state where he could go ahead and do well. But after entering into the campaign, thus the need for a reboot, voters started to like him less. The more they saw him, they liked him less, which is why they're trying a new strategy. But this split here isn't working alongside this reboot as they have planned. In fact, the DeSantis campaign sent a memo to the Never Back Down headquarters in Atlanta saying in bold, "We will not cede New Hampshire." Then, and someone who was granted anonymity to the New York Times, said that they're not going to easily change their course. They don't see DeSantis' claims from the main campaign as ones that they want to follow through on. It seems to be as if the Never Back Down PAC has their own set of priorities for Ron DeSantis, wants him to maintain this standard, more right-wing MO, where the DeSantis campaign is saying, hey, we're losing, and the money that's with Never Back Down, over $100 million that was raised here prior to his candidacy, is no longer backing Ron DeSantis unequivocally in the way that it should be, in a way that would make him, in fact, more electable. So there's a lot here that we really need to unpack. We've already seen that his MO, his brand here is Donald Trump. That's how he's known. That's how he's recognized. That's a problem, right? You also have a monetary issue. The people with the money, the people funneling into your campaign, they no longer agree with you on every single thing. You are starting to see a disappearance in support from from politicians across the United States who don't want to back a loser. For instance, in New Hampshire, even the state that we just mentioned, where again, the more that voters see him, they like him less. Same thing with the politicians. You have state representatives who have publicly revoked their endorsement of Ron DeSantis and given it to Donald Trump. There is just so much on the negative side here. I do not believe there is a pathway forward for Ron DeSantis to turn around this campaign in the way that he thinks, especially with a 2-month-in reboot. There are endless possibilities for the 2024 primary, but 9 out of 10 of those possibilities, Donald Trump is the nominee. That's not how it always was. You can go back to my videos from 6 months ago where I said Donald Trump is on track to lose the nomination. Today, that would be wrong. But then it made sense. He was dipping 10 points, 15 points nationally. Ron DeSantis was up. And at that point in time, quite frankly, Ron DeSantis should have announced, but he didn't. And that gave Donald Trump time to recover. There is time here for Ron DeSantis to recover, but it isn't likely. What we know and have known for the past 8 years from the Make America Great Again wing of the Republican Party is that they are loyal. DeSantis supporters are not, as clearly described by the decrease in polling numbers for him over the past couple of months. Nikki Haley voters are not loyal. Mike Pence voters are not loyal, at least not in the way that they are to Donald Trump. And that is the fundamental problem here, and DeSantis' campaign has yet to crack how they're going to do it. I think it was possible before. The electability argument was a major one, but I don't even think he has that anymore. And there goes the beginning of a collapse of a very, very initially viewed strong campaign that could have been so much more than what it is today. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos, Republican primary election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.